Welcome back, guys. Another episode here. We are gonna be discussing the Gundams.
Yes,
Who are the
we had a
Gundams?
we had a recent epiphany, or at least Jeff did, when he started deciding to start the most wonderful series that ever existed, Gundam. I have walked him through watching all the way from Origin to what he had now successfully completed, Charge Counterattack, and he's now starting to watch Unicorn. And the UC of Gundam is quite an undertaking. What I wanted to ask, as you coming in fresh to this whole thing, is what was your first impression when you started watching Origin, and what do you expect from the show?
Well, I had no idea. It was a mecha show. There's good guys, there's bad guys. You know, you're piloting a mecha, and I figured it'd be all black and white.
But it wasn't that simple,
Not at all.
was it? It wasn't, because Gundam was never meant to be the story of Team A, Team B. It was always meant to be the story of a child growing up in war, of how fractions in war can sometimes be meaningless, because for every atrocity that Sion did, the Federation was right up there. Especially during the guerrilla war, am I right? Anyways,
Right.
and it all started from a dream of a wonderful, wonderful man called Tomio. Tomio had just graduated college, and he started working as an animator for a lot of different groups. I believe he had like his one little clique of people that have worked with him, and they started doing basically side productions for all these animes that were coming out at the time. Eventually, they started working on producing their own anime, which wasn't really their own. It was just mostly them producing an anime for so-and-so toy company.
Right.
Takanaka, Tomy Entertainment, and, well, Tomy Toys, back when they sold toys. Nintendo, back when they sold toys.
Yeah, right. 70s, 80s when they had
Yeah.
board games and actual toys.
And then Sony, when they, sold music through anime, like they still do.
Like they still do, right?
Exactly.
We need to figure out a way so we can have access to Sony's music that is only regionalized in Japan, because that's kind of unfair.
Well, I mean, that's a story for another day,
Yeah.
but it's not as hard as you would think anymore. Anyways, so Tomio had his idea for Gundam. It was a sexy idea. Everybody thought so. I read it. They just went like this, and I wanted to see it in TV, but it's not here. So Tomio decided to kind of pitch the idea to a bunch of different toy companies, and they all went like, I don't know what the hell you're thinking. How are we supposed to sell this to kids? And he was like, well, I'm not trying to make a series for kids. I think this series will be good. And unfortunately, you guys are the only ones funding the show, so can I get some money? And of course, the toy companies were like, no, that's not happening. So he kept trying to tweak the idea, seeing if he can somehow get them to convince it. And one of the major problems that was with Gundam was that it was built up to be a show about war.
Right.
Therefore, the tanks, the weapons, were not the priority. They were supposed to just be a part of the show. So the first thing he did was design, or I believe actually one of his friends was the mecha designer. They designed something that was very contemporary at the time. It was supposed to be a mecha that both represented a weapon of war for the time that it is in the future, and also had characteristics of a samurai.
A samurai? What do you mean?
I'm getting there. Okay, and you get yourself the good old RX 78-2.
Okay, what are you holding? An action figure?
This is a model kit, and I'm going to go ahead and explain that in a second. But
Okay.
This camera is really bad, so you can't really notice it.
It's
But
fine.
basically, the facial features, if you have a picture of the RX-78-2 or the original Gundam to show, it would be a good time to show it.
I do
The
not,
facial
but I do have a picture of what was the model before it. It was a prototype.
Sure.
I have a picture of the prototype, so I'm going to pull that up instead.
Okay. So the RX-78, this is the RX-78-1, which was more closely to its mass-produced brethren, which wasn't exactly a good prototype.
Right.
If you can see his face, he's basically built like a samurai helmet.
Right.
And this is something he did on purpose because he thought that this would appeal more to toy companies and say, hey, this looks like something kids might want. Do you want to produce a show now? The companies decided that, or at least, but Bandai, who is at this point right now basically just Japanese Disney, went and said, you know what? Sure. Even if your show fails, we'll still sell toys. So Bandai is looking around at all these productions. They're trying to come up with something to sell, and what they can come up to sell is not good. They're really, really bad. I would, if you can, I would take a gander to like go online and look up some of these Gundam toy prototypes. So you get these toys that are they don't look anything like the series did at all.
Yeah,
right?
definitely. You can see that.
And Bandai realized that this was not going to sell well, especially if the series was as colorful as it was. And by the way, the original Gundam wasn't even supposed to be colorful. It was just basically a giant white slab of metal or a gray one. And in order to get them to appeal more, he decided to change the colors of the suit blue and red and have like glowing green eyes or blue eyes, depending on what suit you're talking about. And he did that specifically for the aesthetics, that it would appeal more to children, and that kind of led to Bandai being like, maybe we got something here. Maybe we don't.
Maybe we do, maybe we don't. To be fair, that picture I saw reminded me of the old school 80s Transformer toys.
Yes, well, you know, that's what they were going for to begin with.
Right.
Like just selling robotic toys in general. But anyways, so they pitched this to Bandai again with this idea, or Bandai takes this idea pretty much and goes hits running, realize that it cannot make a proper toy. At the same time, Takara Tomy and other toy companies, back when there were toy companies, decided to start making or releasing kits. It wasn't a toy. It was like building a plastic model boat or plane, which were very popular in Japan also.
Right.
At the time, you had companies like Togatami, which produced specifically these kind of toys, and they were flying off the shelves. They produced the glue, they produced the paint, they produced everything. And then Bandai was like, oh my god, we want a piece of that pie, but we do not want to pay them for it. So they did the research and ended up developing their own model kit machines and stuff like that. And they started selling model kits. And that's where they got their funding for Gundam. They saw the model kits could be the future.
Right.
But they had a problem. Models might be cool, they might be nice, and back in the day, they were more of a pain in the ass than they are now. Not that they're not any less of a pain in the ass looking at you, New Gundam. The problem was, they weren't that marketable to children. Mostly because the show wasn't really marketed to children. It was supposed to be a more mature show. And that's what Tomio was... That was the idea that Tomio had. Just like the Gundam was supposed to be originally white and with a laser sword on hand. Laser swords were really just an afterthought, to be real. They were supposed to hold guns and cannons and be like real weapons, right?
Right.
the original designs were more closely resembled to what we now know are the Sakus. They were supposed to just be weapons of war. They weren't supposed to be used cool-looking mobile suits. That's something that just became part of Gundam as it was, but it was something that was done as an afterthought and not really a design. Sure, he wanted the mobile suits of the main protagonist to be different than the ones from the rest of the enemies or whoever else they were fighting, but that wasn't really something that he concentrated with. It was something born out of necessity. And with that, he was able to do his own expression when it comes to the enemy weapons and the enemy mobile suits, which, without intending it, looked more menacing, and I guess you could say it was an easy way to spot the space Nazis. But it wasn't an easy feat at the time, getting from point A to point B.
Right.
Especially since even when they did get the idea to start making model kits, it wasn't perfect. Model kits evolved a lot. Here's an example of just 1991. This is a remake of the Gundam Wing. This is actually the original Gundam Wing 91 model, right? Okay, so you have a regular HG before HG was even a thing with these kind of model kits, and this is pretty much a piece of shit. It's literally a piece of shit. You twist the ankle, and what happens? It pops off. You try to twist the hand, and it
comes off. Right.
It comes off. It was a piece of shit, but it was a model kit, and they were selling it, right? And then years later, they started developing better and better and better and better stuff, and eventually you get yourself, bam! You get a model kit with pulsability. They can move around. They have no problem. Their face can be moved to the wrong side, then back to the right side.
Right.
And it was just amazing how far they came. But right. Why does that matter? It matters because it took time for them to get it right. And time is something they didn't really have. At first, they believed that because the models weren't good, that they weren't selling enough. So then they started pressuring Tomio to release something else they can sell. That's how you got yourself the core booster. They started making little changes to the show to try to make something else to sell.
Oh, is that where we got the Javelin from in the original show?
Yes. It was a little bit changes that made a lot of difference to what they could try to sell. But even then, they weren't selling enough toys. They were selling a lot more than they predicted, but they weren't selling enough. And that started irking Bandai.
Right.
Bandai decided we can't do this anymore. They call up Tomio, which he was already dealing with a crisis around this time, because this is around episode 30 or so, and they tell Tomio, hey, you got yourself 13 episodes to wrap this up, and you need to go. By the way, if you live in America, you only think of 12 because there was an episode that we never got.
I believe personally that episode was very important for the development of the show. So if you have a chance to watch it subbed, and I know a lot of people don't want to watch original Gundam subbed, go find it. I believe it's episode 15?
The Forgotten Warrior. Yes.
The Forgotten Warrior. That's a very, very important episode for various reasons later down the line.
Yes. So Tomio at the time was also freaking out because one of his main animators had gone to, I believe it was had an ulcer or something, and he pretty much ended up being hospitalized. This is also the determining factor to why the last couple episodes of Gundam looked a lot more out of whack than the rest of the series.
Drop in animation quality.
There was a lot of back and forth of how the animation quality came in and out, but that was mostly also because they lost the direction of the main animator.
Right.
he did come back for the last couple episodes. I think it was the last 4 or 5 episodes
Yeah,
that
that's
he
when
was able
the
to.
quality improved.
Yes, that he was able to do stuff, and he was a champ. He hadn't even really fully recovered, and he knew that he had to come back because Bandai was not bulging at all. According to Tomio, he wanted the show to end maybe episode 55 or 56. He wanted more of the story to be developed with Lala. This is another reason why Lala's story got cut short. They really didn't have the time to tell anything they wanted to. Now, I'm going to argue that this ended up becoming better for them because I believe that the fact that Lala's story was so short, it gives it more of an emotional grip on your soul because it kind of unintentionally shows you how new types are supposed to feel.
Right.
Like they feel like they have an entire lifetime of connections with this person, and then when they die, it's just horrifying to them, right? Especially since they can hear them in the afterlife, no matter how long it's been. Trust me, Amuro had to live with that for a long time.
Right.
So, by the way, this is spoilers. I mean, if you haven't watched the show, you're 40 years too late? So...
Well, if they haven't seen the show, then that makes perfect sense why they're watching this.
Yes, it makes perfect sense. I mean, sometimes you just want to be informed about something you don't know. So, basically, Tomio has got bent over by Bandai, told that nothing will change, the series is getting canceled, and they needed to go out in a bang. So they rewrote the script, they had their animator back, they're doing the last 3 episodes, and they're trying to go out in a note that's more somber than most animes would be.
Right.
Of course, Tomio was going the whole suicidal route and really deeply believed if Bandai was gonna fuck them like this, it might as well kill the main character.
All right, Mickey Mouse.
I mean, might as well. If you're gonna try to sell this as a kids show and you then complain that not enough kids are watching, well, let's see how the kids react when you kill the main character.
Right.
And that was his idea at first, which wasn't very popular in the staff, mostly because they believed that maybe, just maybe, something might happen. This story might be picked up again. And, Amuro story wasn't complete. It just wasn't. It was okay to try to get him to die off, because then at that point you can just say, like, he died off young and then can't complain if you don't know the rest of the story.
Yeah,
but
I mean, it seems like that would make sense. You're in the middle of gunfire everywhere. It's bound to happen that a random bullet will happen. It's war. You expect it. That's
something that he really wanted to emphasize with Gundam. He wanted to emphasize the reality of war, right? That's why you have characters in Gundam like Gilius and characters like the Sabi family. The Sabi family's older brother, who pretty much idealized Hitler. By the way, YouTube is going to love this conversation, not even because of the cursing, because I'm about to talk about Nazis. But Susan, please don't, remove this video, or at least, I know you're not going to monetize it, we don't expect it to, but, don't remove the video, because, Anyways, the second older brother idealized Hitler, not because the racist reasons, although kind of but because the ironic thing here is Sendeku had pretty much imposed ideas onto them that even though they believed, they wanted to monopolize, and the ideas was that new types were the new evolution of humanity. That they deserve to be special. That they deserve their own colonies. And this is why he became kind of like a spiritual leader. Where Castilia is, in my mind, a much better villain to the whole thing. But basically, I think it's Guinness or Gnau, whatever.
Something like that.
Yeah, okay. So basically, he idealized that part of Nazism, and he brings it back. And then his father says a very iconic line of, you know, Hitler caused his own fall of the empire, and you sound more and more like him.
Right.
And that's what he says, the line of, like, well, he sounds like a great man. Those ideas what drove him as commander at the time of Sion to push this perspective of new types. We're all new types, or we can all be new types, or as, like, you know, as people who live in space, and we're better than the humans who stay grounded in their Earth and want to rule on us without knowing us.
By your logic, you're making the comparison of Zeon and Nazis. You can say then at that point that new types would be considered the Aryan race at that point. They were superior to everyone else.
Well, that's how he threw it at them. Right. Like, that's how he... And at the time, that was a big driving factor. You can say almost to the same extent as the actual Hitler drove the fact that he tried to blame everything on Jewish people.
Right.
Of any problem in Germany.
Old types, blame things on being grounded on Earth.
The difference here, and this is why I say that Sion is not the ultimate evil and Federation is not the ultimate evil, is that thanks to Origin, you got to see what Sion did, what the Federation did, that was actually bad.
Correct. And
we're
gonna just cover that in the next episode. We're gonna go into a deep dive into Gundam Origins, the origins of Char Aznavour, the man who became the Red Comet.
But basically, what I'm trying to throw as an idea to you is that there was actual examples of atrocities, unlike in real life, in the situation with World War II and how Nazis grew. They actually had examples to draw by, which didn't help because then that just helped increase the popularity of Guinea's words, and he was able to throw this giant idealism of new types are better, new types are superior, all that stuff, whatever.
Right.
Now, it was kind of true that most of the space colonists...
They're called space noids.
But yeah, no, they believed they were all new types. As space noids, they were God-given rights to everything they could decide. Right. And that helped them rationalize the atrocities that they did for the war. Because Guineans knew that their forces weren't going to simply just overtake Earth. I mean, come on. How much people can you have in colonies? Yeah. Now, they weren't that far off. And the other problem for the Federation is that the colonists were already informed on how to fight in space. Not just with battleships like the Federation knew, but in other ways. And that's where Guineas took his chance. He was able to coerce pretty much Anaheim Electronics into giving them the weapons, start building prototypes for them and stuff like that. Eventually, he got Dr. Minosky to literally work with him as a right-hand man in the development of mobile suits. These were giant advantages that they were able to obtain that made them superior in a matter of months instead of years. And that's Dr. Minosky, as you can see. So all these different factors helped them become an actual force against Federation and not just talk shit and hope that they don't get nuked out of existence. And, the Federation had giant flaws with itself, too, because they didn't really care to deal with the problem at the time. By the way, if you're seeing a lot of symbolism here, it's because he's not hiding it. Tomio was trying to show... There's no way this doesn't sound bad in YouTube, but he was basically trying to show a more sympathetic version of Nazis. In the same way as the Federation flag is basically just a giant union. You know? And, really, there's not much to talk to, but I am going to finish the last part of the story about how Gundam was able to succeed even having all these problems. I just really wanted to dive a little bit into, the complexity of the show. But anyways, um, so he was only able to do so much with the last couple episodes of Gundam, and knowing that it was going to be canceled really discouraged Tomio in general. But then the show exploded. Only a couple months later, there was a bunch of letters being sent to the studio, pretty much saying, "Hey, are you guys going to make new episodes? Is this really the end?" And they all came from teenagers who found it really hard to watch the show because they were at school, they had classes, and they was even adults at work, and they didn't have the time.
Right,
so they recorded the show in VHS, or they bought the show when it came on VHS, but they didn't get to see it firsthand, which really hurt the ratings of the show. And when he was able to see this, and I believe at one point he probably went to these with his letters to Bandai and said, "Look at this, you made a mistake." That's where Bandai realized that they needed to throw something at this.
Could you imagine if they had just ended it right then and there?
Then we wouldn't be talking about it now.
Right? That would have just been one of those like 90s
It would have been
shows
just a memory.
Just seen back in the day.
It would have been just a memory. But yes. So basically, they needed to throw something at it. So they knew they were going to make a sequel. Seta was definitely something that was going to be thrown out there. It just didn't come fast enough. They needed the popularity not to die down. So they told Tomio, "Look, make a movie. Make a movie, and if it's successful, we'll do a couple other projects until you're able to work out for, a sequel series."
Right.
So Tomio goes with the idea of like, "Oh, I'll make a movie. I'll make 3 movies."
Perfect.
Okay? I'll make 3 movies. And why did he make 3 movies? Because this is the perfect opportunity for him. The one thing that bothered him throughout the entire series was the quality. The quality was not exactly the best, and especially at the end, it was not good. So what they decided to do is that the 3 movies that would make would be remakes of the story, retellings of the story, to make it shorter, make it fast, make it sweet, but the music would be on point, and the animation would be on point.
Right. Well, on point as much as you could do with animation back then.
Yes. Really, really on point back then. I mean, especially the music. The music just completed everything in the scenes that they did. But yeah, anyways. So the point is, like, these movies were his redemption. But they weren't just a way to fix the series that he had worked so hard for. This was a stepping stone that would lead to future events and newer series.
Which we will cover in later episodes, if you guys want us to do so.
Exactly. This is basically just my rantings in this anime with the help of a person who is now entering Gundam for the very first time. And I gotta say, you jumped in it. You loved it, right?
Yeah.
Gundam is not the cure-all end-all. It's not going to be for everybody.
Nope.
But for the ones that like it, for the ones that see it, the ones who want to give it a step in, we're here to help and point you in the right direction. And I'm telling you, if you're willing to give it a chance, it's going to be a world that it's going to drive you into. It's a world full of stories. It's the story of war and people. It's not just giant robots fighting each other.
Nope.
That is just a tiny scratch in the depth of story that is Gundam. And I hope you guys give it a watch. I hope you guys give this a watch. And I'm hoping that I left you a little bit more informed about my favorite thing in the world.
And that is Gundam.
Well, what I was saying.
That is also my favorite thing in the world. And stay tuned for the next episode. And we'll go into a deep dive of Gundam Origins. I've said this before, but I'm going to plug it again. We're going to go into depth and do some character bios and in-depth explanation of who the Red Comet was, who Amuro was, and what was these pictures that we showed you of these Gundam prototype.
So next time we'll be deeping down into betrayal, love, and the pain of having a family in the Gundam universe.
Alrighty. Gundam Mike and Gundam Jeff. And, well, this is the end of our mission. I think it was successful. So, Gundam Prototype taking off.